I always like to start with anyone that's over 50% roster, but still could be out there in your leagues just to go and consider. DeVante Parker certainly fits that bill. First game back, 5 targets, hauls them all in for 62 yards. Tua now has completed over 76% of his passes since coming back from injury. Insanity how accurate he has been playing, and he was making some high-degree difficulty throws. That sideline throw to Parker to move the chains and seal the game was unbelievable. A trust throw we really didn't see him taking last year. So it's clear to me those guys are in a new type of sync, new type of bond, and I really think Parker facing off the Jets they have a bye this week, but fantasy playoffs, we're looking at the Jets, the Saints, and Tennessee. All 3 of those teams are bottom 5 against wide receivers. Great matchups. The guy is looking solid. He's averaging right now 8 targets per game, about a 24% target share, right around 80-ish yards on the season. He's looking great. So right back into double-digit points his first game back. You love to see it, at least in PPR leagues. I think he's going to go – he could be a stretch run hero. We've seen him do it before. In fact, just a couple seasons ago, he was the wide receiver 2 behind only Michael Thomas for the second half of the season. So we know the talent's there. 2 is playing really well. He'd be the first guy I look at if he's out there in leagues. But at quarterback, moving now into guys that are 50% under or below that threshold. Taysom Hill, we talked about him last week. He was in my top 6 pickups. He certainly was my number 1 QB last week, and that panned out pretty damn big. He couldn't have been any worse. 4 interceptions, real life-wise. The definition of close those eyes and just enjoy the points at the end of it all, right? 34% rostered now, so still out there in a ton of leagues. If you need a quarterback, I would be paying 20%, maybe even higher. I'll talk about fab as we go, but we're at the point of the year where you're either already blown it all and you're just hoping you get some of these guys snuck in. Maybe you have a ton left. You almost want to save some of that in case there is another Madison or something to emerge here down the stretch. But ultimately, you got to go out and get the guys. It doesn't come with you. So if you need a QB and I say 20% bad, maybe you need to blow half your waiver wire budget to go get the guy. Ultimately, though, as we said, 4 picks, and he's still topped over 20 fantasy points, regardless of your scoring settings. He is now averaging, since last year, over 22 fantasy points per game. He was the QB6 last week. He's the QB6 on average across his 6 starts. Beautiful stuff. Absolutely beautiful stuff from Taysom Hill. And now he gets the Jets, the worst rushing defense in the entire NFL. He went for over 100 yards on the ground last week. He's now had 10-plus carries in every single start dating back to last year, an average of 50 yards per game, but over 100 this last week. Unbelievable. Just a great – the definition of the Konami code. Yes, there is the concern of the mallet finger, of the plantar fasciitis, but he had that all game, and he still was getting it done. So as long as he's out there, as long as he doesn't have surgery, sure, there's the risk he gets sat because of the injuries, but how do you win if you don't roll the dice? If you need Taysom Hill at quarterback, you probably need to roll the dice, and who better than this guy at this point? Now moving on to one of my favorite wide receivers on the waiver wire. Doesn't have as much sizzle, not as much like explosive, true league-winning upside, in my opinion, but I think could be a very viable, just set, forget wide receiver 3 at this point. That's Russell Gage. And maybe he could be a league winner given the fact that he just had 12 targets, hauled in 11 of them for 130 yards, was a top 15 wide receiver in PPR and half PPR leagues this past week. But more importantly, the consistency has been there. 7+ targets in 4 of his last 5 games, averaging about a 25% target share in that span. That was a season high, of course, with these 12 targets, but still sexy to see. Not a bad schedule here down your playoffs. There are a couple wide receivers I'm going to talk about a little bit later who I do think have higher ceilings, more blow up, like could just go banana land upside. But in terms of just a nice, steady top 35 option from here on out, that's Russell Gage. I believe in the guy. He's the clear-cut number 1. The only way that would get derailed is if Calvin Ridley shows up, but I don't see that happening at this point. It seems to me like he's done for the season. It's kind of a lost year. I can't imagine the team is trying to get him back at this point anyways. So lock in Russell Gage, their number 1 target, 7+ in 4 out of his last 5. Love him moving forward. Now, at the running back position, my number 1 pickup in terms of rest of season type of usability would be DeVante Foreman. And this is just a guess. We don't know exactly how this backfield is going to shake out. But last time he was out there coming off a bye this week, he had 55.9% of the rush share, 4.8% target share. Not great. But when he's been used in the receiving game, he's ripped off some nice chunk plays. He's nice with blockers in front of him. Still has a little bit of juice there. He ran for 19 carries, 109 yards against the Pats. He did lose a fumble. Wasn't all that pretty. But he was the early down churner. And I think it's between him and Hilliard, right? And Hilliard did rip off that 68-yard touchdown, had more fantasy points, is averaging over 15 points in half PPR leagues across his 2 starts. I get all that. But with Jeremy McNichols likely back after the bye, I think Foreman is the one that has the more secure, big down, different skill set, grinder at the end zone here. And you get the Jags coming in week 14 here. If anybody has watched any Jaguars football lately, that team has quit. They are horrendous, and we're going to watch Foreman steamroll them, in my opinion. So as a just usable right off the bat, and probably during your stretch run, I could see Foreman being a nice bet for 15-plus carries any given week moving forward here. Now, in terms of just a 1-week rental, maybe even more upside belongs to JaMycal Hasty at only 1% rostered. We don't know quite yet what this backfield will look like entering Sunday. It's still so early in the week, but I think it's worth a nice 25% or so of your fab to find out, given that there is nobody as of right now besides JaMycal Hasty, the true last man standing. Eli Mitchell back in the concussion protocol. Given this is his second time in there, that does seem risky. He could be a franchise piece in the future, given how well Eli Mitchell's looked. I don't think he's going to be out there this week. That's I'm not a doctor, just a first guess, but the fact that this is his second time in there doesn't bode well. Then we had Jeff Wilson having a little flare up on his surgically repaired knee, despite the fact he played 2 freaking snaps. Done with him. Useless. Get out of here, Jeff Wilson. And then ultimately, we also have Trey Sermon on IR getting hurt on special teams. There's nobody. There's nobody else. It's him, JaMycal Hasty, and Kyle Juszczyk. And whenever he's been used, I'm not saying Hasty's this world beater, but when he gets in space, he's a solid receiver. He can zip up the lane. It's just one of those run schemes that it typically doesn't matter who's back there. We've seen Orlando get ridiculous, dating back to like Mike Anderson days with Mike Shanahan there at the helm. 1,000-yard rushers out of nobodies. Hasty could go right in there. We've seen him already have monster games in the past as the lead back in the scheme. He could walk right into a big workload. Cincy, a must-win game for both of these teams, kind of as Barcelona's called, the loser goes home type of game. And since he's much more generous to running backs than they are wide receivers, a better pass D than they are a run D, I could see Hasty having himself 15, 20-plus touches, 100 total yards, a nice score there. So as a 1-week rental, I think he could really do some damage. And then if Eli's symptoms ever lingered or something of that nature, we've harped on how good the playoff schedule is for the 49ers, just every position, but including running backs, Atlanta, Tennessee, and who's the last one? It's even worse. But I can forget right off the top of my head. Texans, an even worse team. Awful defenses they've got coming up. So keep those guys in mind for sure. Now, a couple of the wide receivers I was alluding to, as we always talk about, potential league-winning upside happens every year. A blow-up wide receiver. It could definitely be Marquez Valdes-Scantling at only 21% rostered here. He's seen 19 targets across his last 2 games, and that included with Lazard back in the lineup last week before the bye. He didn't have a monster game, 9 fantasy points in that one, but right before that, 10 targets, hauled in 4 of them. Ultimately had 22 fantasy points. He is the lid lifter here. And you look at their soft schedule coming up. Bears, top 10 matchup for wide receivers. Baltimore, nobody's giving up more explosive plays on the season, and especially the receiving game. The most 30-plus yard receptions surrendered by Baltimore, and they just lost Marlon Humphrey. Then you got the Vikes and your fantasy championship. Bottom 3 against wide receivers right now. Scantling could go bananas. Of course, we know the alpha here. It's Davante Adams, but Randall Cobb, his status is up in the air with this groin injury, and Scantling was kind of the clear-cut number 2 anyways over these last couple of weeks. So give me Aaron Rodgers, clear number 2 any day of the week with soft matchups down the stretch. He could be your true blow-up candidate. What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments, check out some more videos, and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.